What is happening in the brain during ascension or energy upgrades? So the human brain is really extraordinary. It was one of my favorite organs in the body. I used to really focus a lot on the brain when I was a physical therapist. I worked in neuropediatrics. So the brain, I've always been really fascinated with the brain. And when it comes to spiritual changes like ascension or energy upgrades, essentially what's happening is your brain will actually change. And I don't have proof of that when it comes to, we would probably have to do a study where we would put spiritual people before their awakening under a functional MRI and then after their awakening under a functional MRI to see if there were changes. So all that I'm sharing here is just anecdotal evidence and just the experience that I've had in going through a spiritual awakening and then in working with so many people from around the world in their awakenings. And what ends up happening in the brain is really fascinating. The way that I see this is that the neurons, remember that you have almost 100 billion neurons in your neurons are your brain cells in your brain. So that's an enormous amount. That's like the amount of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. It's just an enormous amount of cells, and those neurons talk to each other all the time. They're communicating with each other all the time. What happens during ascension, essentially what is happening is, another way to say what ascension is or what energy upgrades are, is that you start to be able to hold more light in your body. That's one of the simplest ways that I like to look at ascension, is that you're now able to hold higher concentrations of light in your body than you were before. And that's what we can call ascension or an energy upgrade. And what this means to the brain, really, in the brain, is, to make it very simple, is your brain just starts functioning a lot better, a lot more efficiently. So one thing I noticed with me, and so many people have said that, is that said that about their lives too, and about their awakenings when I talk about this, is that before and after my awakening, I felt like I just became more intelligent than I was before. It's a feeling that I got. And when I talk to so many people, they say that they feel like they got smarter after a spiritual awakening too. And it's because the brain is actually working more efficiently. You're using more areas of the brain when that ascension process occurs. The neurons start to talk to each other a lot more easily than they did before. And I think a lot of this has to do with trauma energy. So a lot of times before our spiritual awakenings, we're bogged down by a lot of trauma energy, and trauma energy can house itself in the human body, but also in the mental body of the aura, which is connected to the brain. And so you can feel it like there's a weight on top of you, or a cape, like just imagine that you just put this big black cape over your head and you're walking around life with this black cape over you. You don't see very clearly. But then one day, if you just take that cape off and you start looking around, suddenly the world looks very differently to you because you don't have a black cape, kind of filtering the world for you anymore. And so to me, the biggest changes that I saw when it had to do with brains is the idea that your brain starts to function more efficiently, so your intelligence goes up. But it's not intelligence in the traditional sense. A lot of times when we talk about intelligence, we tend to measure only left brain intelligence, logic, and all of that in the left brain. The type of intelligence I'm talking about, that you kind of accelerate into after a spiritual awakening or during an upgrade or ascension, is that intelligence that's more complex, that's not just rational in its thought. So that's more having to do with the right hemisphere of the brain. So you become more easily, it's easier for you to be a more complex thinker. You feel the world in a different way. So your right brain, your right hemisphere starts to come in. You start to see the world less as having boundaries and more as this beautiful kind of dance of life. And that's all translated in the brain through light entering the brain and just using more spaces of the brain than it did before. So the image that I'm getting is like, before your spiritual awakening, before the upgrades, think of your brain as being like, 50% lit up and 50% asleep. And then when you go through an ascension, more, 60% of your brain is now filled with light, and then 70% of your brain is filled with light. So you just light up. You start to feel things differently. But aside from the ability to understand the world in a more complex way, I noticed that about myself. I started to be able to think faster. I started to be able to I could get to from step 1 to step 10 really, really quickly after my awakening. And I've worked with many people who say the same thing. So it's not just with me, it's with pretty much everyone. And one of the reasons why this is happening is because the brain is becoming more efficient. There's more areas of the brain that are lit up with this beautiful light. There's less weight. There's less, the brain is less, it's less stuck on memories from the past, on ruminating on things that used to happen, so it kind of lets go of all of that. And the light comes in and it gives more space for the brain to be dedicated to higher, more complex thinking. Another thing that happens having to do with the brain is that when you awaken and you go through these ascension phases, what ends up happening is your entire nervous system becomes more sensitive, and your brain is part of your nervous system. And so what I noticed happened to me was, as I would go through these periods of ascension, my senses would become more sensitive, and my brain stopped filtering as much information as it did before. Now, for some people that can feel like, oh my God, that's a little bit scary. What do you mean your brain stopped filtering the excess information? But for me, it didn't feel that way. It just felt like I was more alive. So my senses became more alive. I was able to see and to feel the world in a different way than I was before. And it was all because this brain was mediating the neuronal activity and the conversations that the neurons were having, and my entire nervous system was having, was more, it was more online. It was more sensitized. It was more alive. Okay. So these are just some of the changes that happen with the brain. It's really cool. And let me know in the comments below if you guys have been experiencing any of this, where you feel like your brain is thinking more efficiently after these upgrades or after ascension. You feel like you're smarter. You can see things. You can see complex patterns. You can see things in a different way than you did before. Or if your senses have become more sensitive, more alive. This is all because the neurons, the increased light in your brain is increasing the communication between your neurons, and they are no longer filled with any kind of past baggage, so they can actually be more free to integrate more light.